I feel like this is a question that when you read it, you immediately have your own opinion or answer ready for why Battlefield games should or should not have a single player campaign. And look, I'll just admit right off the rip, for a really long time, I've firmly been in the camp that Battlefield games just simply don't need a single player campaign. But after 2042, I've seen a huge paradigm shift in the community on this topic. It's almost like 2042 developed like this weird trauma response from all of us, right? Like we're going to look back on that game as if it was a catastrophic event or like natural disaster in the community, because I haven't seen people switch up their opinions on what the franchise needs more like I've seen since 2042 launched. And because DICE confirmed that the single player campaign is coming back, quote unquote, bigger and better than ever before in this upcoming title, I thought it would be cool to tell you guys how and why I changed my mind on this topic. But before we get into the video, if you guys enjoy the content, feel free to hit that like button. It helps me out quite a bit. Also, I really appreciate the support and response to my previous video. It was really cool coming back to uploading to this channel after almost honestly like 3 years, and having a video get that kind of reaction was super awesome. So again, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to finding out more about this new game alongside all of you. So my opinion, and not all, but a lot of people's take on a single player campaign for Battlefields has been this: the core experience of a Battlefield game is the multiplayer, right? So thus, why waste time or resources on a single player campaign when 90% of the player base will never touch it? And when you think about it, like even now on a surface level, it's still like that still makes sense. Battlefield has never had a super strong campaign experience compared to like Call of Duty, right? Especially when it comes to like the cultural impact, I guess. Like you never hear anyone talk about characters from Battlefield campaigns that are legendary like you would with, let's say, Captain Price from Modern Warfare or Mason from Black Ops, right? Like those stories still are considered some of the best FPS campaign experiences ever made, or even like the best campaigns in general ever made. And Battlefield just never had that. Even when they really tried, like there were some cool moments. I've said this before. I personally really liked Battlefield 3's campaign and the Bad Company games as well. I mean, like the goofy characters, they were fun. There were some memorable missions, but like regardless, they're just objectively not as good or polished as a Call of Duty campaign, but it never mattered, right? Like we don't play Battlefield for the single player usually. Like we played it because the multiplayer kicked Call of Duty in the ass, right? Like I've had good times in Call of Duty, but there is nothing that compares to a Battlefield multiplayer experience when it's on its A game. It's some of the most immersive multiplayer FPS content you can get when it's done correctly. So what changed? Well, 2042 came out, a game that before releasing claimed it didn't need a single player campaign. They said that with all of the extra time and resources that they were going to save by excluding the single player from the game, the multiplayer aspect would reach levels and scale that we had never seen before. And to be honest, I was cool with it. I know some people back then were kind of complaining about that, but I was completely fine with it. This is exactly what I felt like they needed to do, especially after like Battlefield 5, where the game comes out with multiplayer being completely bare bones. And then you're like sitting there looking over at the war stories part of the game, and you're thinking like, why did they waste time on this? I feel like I wish they had just spent all of the time that they used on war stories on the multiplayer, so that when it launched, the experience was way better, right? So 2042 releasing with no campaign was no problem to me. I believed them, unfortunately. I thought this would be the reason the game got back to its core, you know, exceptional, immersive multiplayer combat with campaign not getting in the way, you know what I mean? Like all hands on deck for multiplayer. Boy, were we wrong. 2042 came out worse than Battlefield 5, and way worse on that note. And looking back, I actually think a huge reason is because it didn't have a single player campaign. Look, because part of the unique aspect of Battlefield is playing a game where you feel like you are part of a bigger battle, a soldier fighting in a bigger army, a war fought for a bigger purpose. Like, when there's no storyline to the game, there's no purpose, right? Like, there's no reason we are fighting these battles. And that might sound insignificant because at the end of the day, it's just a video game, bro, right? Like, but in my opinion, it defeats the purpose of what makes Battlefield as a game so great. The NOPAT narrative from 2042 made completely no sense. Like, I almost guarantee you, if I asked any of you guys what the storyline of the 2042 game was from beginning to end, like, none of you guys could tell me what it is. I can't even tell you what it is. I bet I could look it up, but do we know how the world got to where it was in that game? Do we know what we're fighting for? Do we know why we're fighting? Do we even really know? Is there a villain? Is there not a villain? Are we all villains? You know what I mean? Like, I have no idea what the fuck is going on in that game. The characters, again, wacky. Everyone looks the same. So when you're playing that game, at the end of the day, it doesn't feel like you're fighting in a war. It feels more like you got dropped into like a VR battle arena with no stakes. You know what I mean? Like, besides being competitive when it comes to like the video game itself, nothing really matters underneath the surface of the game. And with Battlefield 5 and Battlefield 1, the war stories, although not my favorite to be honest, were better than nothing, because at least those games were based on historical battles. We all know from history what the stakes were. We knew the factions involved. We could connect in, I guess, like role play, for the lack of a better term, with each match. Like, and to be honest, if any of the Battlefield games didn't need a campaign, honestly, it was these two because of the sheer history of the wars. 2042, however, had no identity because it had no story, at least one that made any kind of sense. Again, why is this map I'm playing on important? Why are we fighting here? What happened to the world I'm in? I don't want to learn that by going to the Battlefield website and reading blogs on the story of the game I'm playing. I want to play the game and feel the story. You know what I mean? And clearly the design of the game suffered from this as well. You know, usually games with single player campaigns have multiplayer maps based off of the single player. And what this does is it helps you kind of like connect the dots between the two modes, right? Like, it gives the multiplayer content a leg to stand on, like a foundation, right? To set the tone for the gameplay, the factions that you're playing as, the guns that you end up using, the scenario and the landscape, and like the reason that you're fighting in the war, right? And also it's allowing the single player to kind of breathe on its own and take time to flesh out the story. And also, to add to that, with no narrative foundation in the game really, I can also only imagine how much harder it is from like a developer's perspective to even create the game. Like, how do you create meaningful maps or experiences for the multiplayer game when you have nothing to work off of, right? Like, even with, like, let's say even with like a DLC or an extra map that you're going to add down the road in a season, and it might even include a location that's not located in the core single player element of the game, right? You still have a story to work off of. Like, you can almost use the DLC maps to extend the story and bring in new chapters or answer unanswered questions or mysterious things or little Easter eggs that were in the campaign. You can answer them with multiplayer maps and DLC because there's a world. There's a foundation. There's something that connects everything together. Like, everything that is done in the campaign is what gives context and atmosphere to the multiplayer. Yeah, so I changed my mind. I honestly used to believe that Battlefield campaigns were a waste of time, waste of resources. I mean, like, it was always cool to me. I played, again, the Battlefield 3 campaign. I played part of Battlefield 4, Bad Company 2, but I always did it when I was like bored or if the internet wasn't working. You know what I mean? It was just something to do. It was nothing I looked forward to doing. But yeah, I believe Battlefield games should always have a campaign now, and not even to speak to the whole part of the argument where it's like value, right? Like the value aspect of this conversation, whether you feel it's fair or not. If a developer gives you less content for the same amount of money because they're pulling out the single player or they're putting it back in, right? Like I don't even care about that, to be honest. In my opinion, campaigns are just essential to the world building, to the map design, to the factions, to the vehicles, to the weapons, and ultimately with all of that, to the gameplay. And to me, even if it's not like a groundbreaking blockbuster storyline, right? A campaign's like not only giving you or giving the game a clear direction, but it's also allowing the developers to expand and build upon a story that is set and established. And I wanted to see what people were thinking in the Battlefield Reddit about this topic. And I feel like this comment specifically really resonated with me. He says, the Battlefield franchise doesn't have great campaigns, but it means that the next campaigns should be improved, not removed. And it's interesting because if you're a longtime Battlefield player, you would know that the older games didn't have campaigns at all. Like Battlefield 2, Battlefield 2142, just for some examples, no single player campaign, and those were amazing. But clearly this isn't the same DICE anymore, and to be honest, it's not the same era. Yet even those games had more of a narrative identity than 2042 ever had, especially 2142. I believe when you would start up that game, honestly, like I'm probably gonna try and find it and show you guys while I talk about it, but it would even show a little narrative video of what happened to the world in that game. Like it would show this huge ice age of the centuries, which is splitting humanity apart, and how these factions have developed to fight over the remaining livable land of Earth. And that's all we needed, dude. Like the lore and the tone of the game was set immediately. Like fighting in those matches felt like you were fighting for the survival of whichever faction you were playing as. It was awesome, man. Like it made the game just feel like there was meaning to it. The battles had meaning, the maps had meaning. Like I'm fighting this war with my army because we are trying to survive extinction. There was that kind of underlying message and atmosphere in the game that just helped immerse you so much more. I am curious to hear what you guys think though, because I know not everyone is in agreement with this. Like again, I used to not care about campaign, and to be honest, even with this new game when it comes out, I'm definitely gonna boot up the campaign, right? But I might not even finish it, but I don't care. I don't care if I finish it, because at least I can see what the developers were trying to do with the game and what story they were trying to tell. And I almost guarantee you that's going to bleed into the multiplayer and just make the multiplayer feel like it's standing on way stronger foundations. Like there's going to be a theme to the maps. But let me know, shoot me a comment on the video. Do you think DICE and EA should use resources to build a campaign, or do you think it's simply just like a waste of time focusing on a part of the game that, like, honestly still is not a huge focus and maybe 10% of the player base will actually complete? But yeah, guys, let me know. If you've watched this far, again, I really appreciate you. If you enjoyed the content, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Every day we are getting closer and closer to this next Battlefield game, and I know we are all starved for some quality Battlefield gameplay, something other than Call of Duty or fucking Delta Force, man. But yeah, my name is Sam. I will see y'all next time. Bye.